The afternoon sun hung low in the sky as 14-year-old Malik walked home from basketball practice, dribbling his worn-out ball along the sidewalk. He had no idea that his life was about to take a turn he never saw coming. Just a few blocks from his house, flashing red and blue lights appeared behind him. Confused, he turned around. Two police officers were already stepping out of their patrol car, eyes locked on him. "Hands where we can see them," one officer barked. Malik froze, his heart pounded in his chest. "Dolly, what did I do?" he stammered, looking around. There was no one else in sight. The officers didn't answer. Instead, they grabbed his arms, yanking them behind his back. Panic surged through Malik. "Wait, I didn't do anything," he pleaded, struggling against their grip. But the officers had already made up their minds. To them, he wasn't just a kid walking home. He was a suspect, a criminal, someone who fit the description. A neighbor pulled out their phone, recording as Malik was shoved against the squad car. Tears welled in his eyes, his voice cracking. "Please, call my dad." One of the officers scoffed. "Oh yeah, and who's your dad supposed to be?" Malik's lips trembled, but he forced out the words. The moment they left his mouth, everything changed. The officers exchanged glances. Their grip loosened. Their faces paled. Because they had just arrested the son of someone they never expected. And karma. It was about to hit harder than they ever imagined. The officers hesitated, their grips loosening as they exchanged nervous glances. The tension in the air shifted, thick with uncertainty. Malik could feel it too, though his fear hadn't faded. His wrists still ached from the tight hold, his breathing ragged from the sudden chaos. "What did you just say?" one of the officers asked, his voice quieter now, almost cautious. Malik swallowed hard, his heart racing. "Call my dad, you'll see." The officer standing closest to him glanced at his partner, then at the small crowd that had started gathering. A few people were still recording, murmuring amongst themselves. The situation was quickly spiraling out of their control. "Look, kid," the other officer muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "We got a report. You fit the description." Malik's fists clenched. What description? His voice was shaky, but frustration was creeping in now. "I was just walking home from practice." The officers didn't answer right away. Instead, they exchanged another look, this one more uneasy. One of them finally pulled out his radio. We need to verify some information." Malik could hear the uncertainty in his voice, but it didn't make him feel any safer. His mind raced. Why were they acting different now? What was it about his dad that changed things? He wanted to demand answers, to fight back, but he knew better. For now, he just had to wait. The longer the officers stalled, the more restless the crowd became. A woman called out, "Let that boy go." Someone else added, "This is wrong, and you know it." Malik's stomach twisted as he stood there, still trapped in the middle of something he didn't understand. But one thing was clear: whatever was coming next was going to change everything. One of the officers cleared his throat and stepped away, pressing his radio to his mouth. Malik watched him closely, his body still tense. He could feel the weight of every second stretching out, making the air around him heavy. The crowd had grown larger now, people whispering and shaking their heads. Someone's car was still running in the background, the low hum filling the uneasy silence. The officer, still holding Malik's arm, looked uncomfortable. His grip wasn't as strong anymore, but he hadn't let go. Malik didn't know if that was a good sign or not. He just wanted this to be over. "You said your dad," the officer finally said, his voice quieter now. "Who is he?" Malik took a deep breath, his voice steady despite everything. "Just call him," he said again. He wasn't going to explain himself. It wasn't his job to convince them of his innocence. The officer hesitated, then sighed before stepping back. "Fine." He pulled out his phone. Malik could see the nervous energy in his movements, like he already knew he had made a mistake. Meanwhile, a young woman in the crowd, still recording, turned to an older man beside her. You see how they switched up real quick. The second he mentioned his dad, she whispered, shaking her head. The older man, arms crossed, exhaled sharply. Yeah, they know they messed up. Question is, how bad? Back near the squad car, the second officer returned. His face had changed. His jaw was tight, his hands fidgeting at his belt. Malik caught the look in his eyes. He had seen it before. Not anger, not frustration. Fear. The officer who had been making the call glanced over at his partner. We got a problem, he muttered under his breath. Malik swallowed, his mind racing. He still didn't know exactly what was going on, but one thing was clear. The officers had just realized they weren't in control anymore. The officer holding the phone took a shaky breath before looking at his partner. We need to let him go, he muttered under his breath, but Malik still caught it. The other officer's eyes darted between Malik, the crowd, and the phone. His jaw tightened. Are you sure? He whispered back, his voice laced with hesitation. Before the first officer could respond, the sound of tires screeching against the pavement made everyone turn their heads. A sleek black car came to a stop right behind the squad car. The door swung open, and out stepped a man in a dark suit, his presence commanding the entire street. Malik exhaled in relief. His dad. The officers stiffened instantly, recognition flashing across their faces. It was the same kind of recognition that turned their nervousness into full-blown panic. The crowd watched in silence, phones still recording, waiting for whatever was about to happen. The man adjusted his jacket and took slow, deliberate steps toward his son, his gaze never leaving the officers. What is the meaning of this? His voice was calm, but there was an undeniable edge to it. The officer who had been holding Malik immediately stepped back, his hands hovering awkwardly near his belt. Sir, there was a misunderstanding, he stammered. Malik's dad didn't even blink. A misunderstanding. He looked at his son, then back at the officers. Is that why my boy was handcuffed, shoved against your car, and surrounded by a crowd of people recording his humiliation? The second officer cleared his throat. Sir, we were just following procedure. The man took another step forward. And what procedure is that? His voice was still calm, but the weight behind his words made both officers visibly uncomfortable. The one where you detain a child with no evidence. The one where you assume guilt before asking a single question. Neither officer spoke. Everything. The silence stretched on, thick with tension. Malik's dad didn't raise his voice, but the weight of his words pressed down on the officers like a storm about to break. The crowd stood frozen, waiting for the moment everything would tip over. Then, just as one of the officers opened his mouth to stammer out an excuse, another squad car came screeching to a stop. The doors flew open, and a senior officer stepped out, his face unreadable, but his movements sharp and deliberate. He walked straight toward Malik's father, barely sparing the two officers a glance. Sir, he said, his voice steady but cautious. I need to speak with you. Privately. Malik's father didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the two officers who had arrested his son. Whatever you need to say, he replied, you can say it here. The senior officer hesitated, his gaze flickering to the growing crowd, the dozens of phones still recording. He inhaled sharply. Sir, please, it's urgent. Malik's father studied him for a moment before finally giving a small nod. He turned to his son, his expression softening just slightly. Stay right here. Malik didn't want him to go. He didn't trust these officers, not after everything that had just happened. But he nodded anyway. His father followed the senior officer a few steps away, just out of earshot. The two arresting officers stood stiffly, avoiding Malik's eyes. One of them wiped his forehead, looking more anxious by the second. Something wasn't right. Then, before Malik could think too much about it, he heard something behind him. A low voice. Urgent whispers. He turned slightly, catching sight of a man in the crowd, someone he hadn't noticed before. He was speaking into his phone, glancing nervously toward the senior officer and Malik's father. Malik's stomach twisted. Whoever this man was, he knew something. And judging by the way his hands were shaking, it was something big, something dangerous. Malik's pulse pounded in his ears as he watched the man in the crowd. His fingers gripped his phone tightly, his expression tense. Every few seconds, his eyes darted toward Malik's father and the senior officer, as if he was waiting for something he didn't want anyone else to know. Then, almost too fast to notice, the man turned and slipped away, moving quickly through the gathering crowd. Malik's gut told him something was wrong. He turned back to the officers, his dad still speaking in hushed tones with the senior officer. Whatever they were talking about, it was serious. His dad's jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. One of the officers who had arrested him shifted uncomfortably. He cleared his throat. "Listen, kid, this wasn't personal," he mumbled. "We were just doing our job." Malik stared at him, his chest still tight with frustration. "Your job." His voice was low but steady. "Your job is to protect people, but you didn't protect me." The officer looked away, shame flickering across his face. Before he could say anything else, the senior officer suddenly raised his voice. "You need to detain that man. Now." The command snapped through the air like a whip. Everyone turned just in time to see the man who had been on the phone break into a full sprint down the sidewalk. "Hey!" One of the officers lunged into action, chasing after him, while the other scrambled for his radio. Malik's father turned back toward him, his face now unreadable. He reached for his son's shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. "It's over," he said, but Malik could tell there was more. "Who was that guy?" Malik asked, his heart still racing. His father hesitated, then exhaled. "Someone who wanted this to go away." He looked at the officers still standing there. "And someone they were working with." Malik's eyes widened. His dad wasn't just someone important. He was someone dangerous to the people who thought they could get away with this. And now their whole plan had just fallen apart. The officer tackled the fleeing man to the ground, and within seconds, handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The crowd murmured in confusion, people shifting closer to see what was happening. The once powerful officers who had arrested Malik now stood frozen, their faces pale as they watched everything unravel. The senior officer turned back toward them, his expression sharp. "We'll be having a long conversation about your actions tonight," he said coldly. His eyes flickered toward Malik, then his father. "I apologize for what happened to your son." Malik's father nodded but didn't say anything right away. He was still watching the officers, his gaze unreadable. The silence between them was heavier than any words could be. Then finally, he turned to Malik, his face softening. "Let's go home." As they walked away, the crowd slowly began to disperse, people still whispering about what they had just witnessed. Malik felt the weight of everything settle in, how quickly things could have gone differently, how easily the truth could have been buried if his father hadn't shown up. When they reached the car, Malik hesitated before getting in. "Dad," he asked quietly, "what were they trying to cover up?" His father sighed, glancing back at the scene behind them. "Some people think they're above the rules," he said. "They use their power the wrong way, and when they get caught, they try to make it disappear." He looked at Malik, his eyes filled with something heavy, something Malik didn't fully understand yet. But the truth always comes out. Malik nodded slowly. He wasn't sure what would happen next to those officers or the man they arrested, but one thing was clear. Tonight, justice had won. And that was something no one could take away.